Good afternoon, everybody. I don't want to fall off the stage. I'm Greg Topo. I'm a national education writer at USA Today. I have the pleasure of moderating a panel, probably the most diverse panel I've ever been a part of. I just want you to know that I have deputized this group to interrupt one another if they need to. The way I see this panel is sort of like a dinner party, if you will, except we have no food, we have no wine, and we have no comfortable chairs. But aside from that, we'll be good. So the subject of our talk today, if I can find my first card, is about technology unbundling higher education. As it turns out, this panel has experience in more than just higher ed. They have experience throughout the entire system. So my sense is that we're going to get to the unbundling and the disruption of lots and lots of pieces of our education system, not just higher ed. The proposition here is that technology is going to make education more affordable, more flexible, more customizable, and it's going to help give young people skills for the real world. And that is sort of, I think, the thing we're going to see if we can break here. We're going to see if we can really kind of get to the bottom of that. To discuss this, I have a really wonderful panel. I'm just going to sort of let them introduce themselves, starting with Astrid. And then we'll go around to the right, and then we'll get the conversation started. I'm going to give them about 2 minutes, and I will cut you off if you go on too far about who you are. So, but basically the instruction is just tell us who you are, what you do, and kind of why you're here.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm Astrid Tuminas, and I'm the Regional Director for Corporate External and Legal Affairs for Microsoft Southeast Asia and New Markets, and that's 15 countries. And I am here because the CEO of WISE is my former fellow Vice Dean at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
It's a small world.
So I'm a big fan of higher education. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's and a PhD, and I'm a bona fide Sovietologist. I was a specialist in the former Soviet Union. It's a dead profession, so I have reinvented myself a few times. And I think in technology it's extremely exciting because the opportunity for reinvention and having 4, 5, 6 very distinct careers in your life is more of a possibility today. So I've had 4 or 5 distinct careers. I just used to ascribe it to attention deficit disorder. But I've concluded that I'm ahead of my time. So I look forward to this discussion.
Great. I don't think being a Sovietologist is obsolete. I think you'll probably get a call from the White House at some point. Don't you think? I mean,
I'm actually based in Singapore, and when Russia invaded Ukraine, I was being begged by media to talk about it because I was the only Russia expert in town, but
exactly.
I couldn't do it.
Thanks. And we're going to hear a little bit about your daughter at some point, too. Let's not forget, okay?
Yes, so I have a case study today.
Hold that thought. Ben.
Hi, my name is Ben Nelson. I'm the founder of Minerva. Minerva is a relatively new higher education university system, started in the United States, but serving a very global student body, which is both 80% not from the United States and more socioeconomically diverse than practically any highly selective university in the world. Minerva has actually started its own 4-year undergraduate university program, which is outlined in a book that you'll see be flashing behind me on the screen, called Building the Intentional University, and has just been assessed by a third party, which has demonstrated that in 8 months, we show the absolute highest both scores and advancement in our students along the lines of critical thinking, problem solving, scientific reasoning, and effective communications. And that is compared to other universities taking 4 years. So what we do in 8 months, no university in the United States has been able to demonstrate that they can do over 4 years' time.
Name check the book again. What's it called?
It's called Building the Intentional University, Minerva
Intentional.
and the Future of Higher Education.
Intentional.
Intentional.
Okay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Honored to be here as well. It's my third time at WISE. I'm Claudia Costin, and I run a think tank on education policies in one of the most important private universities in Brazil. I was previously Senior Director for Global Education in the World Bank. And I'm not only an education specialist, but I'm also an activist on education, especially for equity in education. I'm a Twitter-addicted activist with 77,000 followers discussing just education, science, and technology. And I'm here because I'm not only a member of in the consultative board of the most important Brazilian university, USP, but I'm as Senior Director for Global Education, I worked with the important initiative from the World Bank, Centers of Excellency in Africa. So 24 centers of excellence in Africa and trying to build for the country a good higher education system.
And you're also former federal minister of
yeah.
education.
I was. I'm also federal minister, but not of education, of public policy, and I was subnational secretary of education of the most beautiful city in the world, Rio de Janeiro, and a secretary in the state of São Paulo as well.
Great, thanks. Carmen.
Hi, I'm Carmen Pellicer. I come from Spain. I'm the director of Trilema. Trilema is a foundation that started in 1998, formed by teachers who were committed to education and unhappy with the way things were. We started doing professional development, and now we are the biggest group in my country. We do media of 7,000 hours of professional development in all types of schools in Spain and outside of Spain. And we've been involved in different programs to train teachers. So that's what we mainly do, to try the educators of educators in the future. And I suppose that's why I'm here. I'm not sure why.
Nobody told you really why you're
higher
actually
education,
here.
because my main field obviously is to work with compulsory education. But for changing that, we need to change the way we prepare future teachers. I am the author of the white paper that my government is now working on for the future law of education in my country.
And you guys, by the way, I want to be the eternal teacher and praise you all for being under your 2 minutes. It's really remarkable. But so, because of that, I want to give Carmen a chance to talk a little bit also about your filmmaking.
That's right.
Yeah, can talk a little bit about that too.
We have a small film producer. We've produced up to now 3 films.
So you're the producer, correct?
The producer, we
okay.
write the scripts,
okay.
and we travel with a team around the world. So the first one is on the website. It's called Teachers. So we went to UK. We went to Cambridge University. We filmed the beginning of the project of Cambridge University Primary School. And then we went to Guinea Equatorial in the frontier with Gabon, one of the poorest areas that we've visited. And we were looking for what makes good a school, what makes good education. And then we compare the different systems with Spanish stories as well. And then the second film has just come out, The Other Education. We've been in China to find out why Chinese get so good results in PISA. And then we went...
They cheat, don't they? Sorry, I'm sorry. That was a terrible joke.
And then we went to Cameroon in Africa to film how in the forest, Yangi, which is an African costume where women get together to get kids to school and help. And then homeschooling in France, and then story as well in Spain with kids who have been through cancer and how that affects the brain and the way they need support for learning.
I think you just answered the question why you're here. I think that your two films, and you've got a third one. You're sort of
Yeah,
you're
we are working on the third
working
one
on them.
still.
And what's the status? Do you have the subject yet? Or are you looking for funding? Where are you with that?
Funding
Funding
should
would be
really
nice,
useful
okay.
if anybody in the room can help.
Anyone has some
Yeah, because
some
we
money
really
in their
think
pocket.
we want to change education. It's not enough to change the schools. It's not enough to change universities, teachers, politicians. You have to change the mind of society, the way they perceive education. So that's the reason why we write books. We write more than 100 books a year with lots of materials for teachers, for kids. And we produce films. We are in the radio. We have a radio program every week. So we do lots of things to create a different mind about the importance of education.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, so I actually, since I'm the boss, I'm gonna start. I want to make an executive decision, and I actually want to start by hearing your daughter's story, because I think that would be a great jumping off point for our conversation. So, and I've heard the story, but pretty much nobody else has. So I guess what I'm hoping you can do is take us, Astrid, through not just her story, but also your story. So start with that, and then talk about how maybe that informs what she's going through.
Yes, the question for me actually why I thought about raising my experience and my daughter's experience is this question of, do we still need higher education in this connected age, or can we learn everything just off of our computers? And if you look at this first slide here, I have two slides. That's me there in the school uniform. So if you've been to the Philippines, this is a typical nipa hut. I grew up in this hut. It's a house on stilts in the water. No electricity, no radio, no plumbing, no books, no dictionary. I was an illiterate child until some nuns from an order called the Daughters of Charity, who were doing their slumming and helping poor neighborhoods, came and found me. I was 5 years old and said, "Oh, you're very talkative. Why don't you come to our school for free?" And this is the second most expensive school in the city. And from there, so for me, discovering reading was unbelievable. And it went from that to me getting a scholarship later on at the age of 15 to the University of the Philippines. And then I went to Harvard and MIT for graduate school. And so my answer to higher education, do we still need it in a connected age? And I work for a tech company today. I value technology. My answer is absolutely yes. You need higher education, and there are many, many reasons why I would make that argument. Fast forward years later in my life, I had a child in my 30s. I have 3 children. This is my firstborn. Her slide, please. That's my daughter. She's 21 years old. At the age of 18, she was a top graduate of Singapore American School. She was bright at everything, mathematics, words, drama. She had a rock band and gets into Columbia University, goes there for 1 semester, and then I get this phone call. I'm dropping out. I don't buy into this education. It's more of the same. I'm going to go and, be a farmer.
So this is Columbia, the Columbia
Columbia
in New York.
University in New York City. She was born and
Ivy
raised in
League.
New York and Hong Kong and Singapore. And so I thought, fantastic. She's in the city where she was born. She would love it. She's a city girl. And I went through the deepest crisis of my life related to higher education. And 2.5 years later, this girl has done permaculture farming in the Philippines, Nepal, India, Thailand. She's worked as an au pair in Suzhou, China, and with an autistic child in Hawaii. She's learned to butcher a sheep. She's learned to knit to a professional quality that she can sell her knitting. And I have never handled knitting needles in my life, neither did she when she lived in my house. And then she tells me that, she is getting an education. And so when I've tried to wrap my head around this, I still think she's getting a deficient education because I'm biased towards university.
Sure.
But I have come to, just the closing line is, I've come to respect what this new generation is doing. They're asking some big questions, and they're questioning the models that are out there. They are certainly learning, and I still hope she enrolls in this guy's school or some other school.
So Ben, just quick reaction to Astrid's daughter's education so far. I call it, I have we talked, I have a 21-year-old daughter as well on her 4th gap year. Okay, so and I actually, so we have so much in common. I actually call it her gap career. So, but what's your reaction as somebody who runs that actual college?
Yeah, so I am this very odd creature. So I started a brand new university program specifically because the evidence shows that college education is terrible, and it's terrible uniformly. Harvard all the way down to the institutions you've never heard of. In fact, the higher up you go, the worse the education is. It's actually shown.
And the measure is what?
And the measure is retention of information, the quality of education, the advancement of students on any level of metrics. So I mentioned this test that showed how much our students progress, and it measures capacity for critical thinking, problem solving, scientific reasoning, written communications, all the things that universities claim to teach. And the universities that administer this test never release the data because it actually shows they don't educate. And in fact, the universities that educate the least, some of this data was leaked to the Wall Street Journal about 6 months ago, wrote a big article about it. So at Purdue University, which is considered one of the best universities in the world, the advancement of students taking this test between the beginning of freshman year to the end of senior year was, wait for it, 0. 0. Right? If you are merely alive between the age of 18 to 21, you should naturally progress in these metrics.
You're just sort of sitting in your basement watching.
Right. That would be
MTV
sufficient to have some value. But apparently going to Purdue, not to pick on Purdue, this is true of frankly any elite university who administer this test, you will have 0 advancement. And that's a frightening thing.
I was thinking, I've got a daughter as well. I think all of us have daughters, so that makes us think a lot. 30 years ago, when you were 18 and you were an adult, you finished your high school, you had a clear idea what you wanted to become, so university was a step forward adult life. And 18 years old now in developed countries are teenagers in this long adolescence that doesn't end until you're 30-something. Spain has the highest rate of youngsters living at home by the age of 30. So the role that university had 30 years ago in terms of research, of high knowledge, or sort of direct preparation for professional life, now it's changed because psychology of youngsters have changed.
So are you thinking maybe that the colleges are now sort of having to raise our children in a way they didn't have to before? Or,
Up to a point. I think we separated very radically the role of compulsory education, which prepares you for life, and higher education prepares you straight to the business or your profession. I think universities will have to change and assume that the grades will have to have a more educational role, accompany more personalized emotional, social, even values and spiritual role modeling of the youngsters of the future.
Can I bring some word of caution here? Because we live in 2 different worlds. I'm going to bring the perspective of the developing world, where they don't have the means to be adolescents forever. I do have a daughter as well that is taking her adolescence, but who do not live in families like mine or yours or yours. If you remember, in 2015, 194 countries have signed the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of them was related to education. So to ensure quality education and inclusive education for all and promote lifelong learning's opportunities. And one of the targets was related to scholarships, especially for the least developed countries, and expand access. So yes, higher education is relevant. Yes, there is a need for higher education, especially in the world that we will be living. Because this kind of experience that my daughter, your daughter, and eventually your daughter is living is not allowed to every young people. They will need to go through a higher education institute to prepare for what is coming in the world, because there won't be jobs for somebody that has just till mid-secondary or eventually the end of secondary, which is also a target to complete. So they need not only to learn something that would prepare them for a job, but also to prepare them to frequently be changing jobs. So what higher education will need is to reinvent itself so that it teaches to think, to be global in the to understand global citizenship, but more than anything, to be able to be the owner of your own life and to be able to think, to reinvent yourself continuously.
So if I might add to that, if you take the paradigm of technical and adaptive, in leadership, so there's the technical, you want kids to have the skills. So the skills that just get them a job. And certainly you can acquire some of that at university and higher education. However, on the adaptive side, the ability to think critically, the ability to listen to others, the ability to empathize, the ability to collaborate. So most of that needed in this very mixed up, globalized, sometimes very polarized world. I think that you can certainly learn some in a
Can
university
I build on
setting.
that very quickly? And that needs to begin, not in tertiary education, but
That's correct.
since pre-primary, to teach to collaborate. I think the word is student agency and collaboration. Be able to invent your life and to collaborate.
But I think we have two different discourses, because
At
in
least
one
two.
way, at least two. I mean, everybody recognizes the importance of that, but the ways people have access to universities are still very old-fashioned testing of instrumental skills. Apart from the fact that PISA and all their friends are putting pressure on the educational international systems, so they give priority just to a straightforward instrumental learning, putting aside any investment on developing really sophisticated, rigorous programs to develop all the other skills. So we have a double, like all these forums, we defend a different education, but then day to day, the options we take in our countries are going the opposite way.
No, this is great. This is just like a dinner conversation, by the way, because we are covering everything.
Somebody
it's
bring
great.
us some food, please.
Yeah, I think we need some food.
Can we
yeah.
get some snacks?
But you're exactly right. So I think you're all hitting the nail on the head, which is you in order to fix the enterprise of higher education, you actually can't fix any of the symptoms. You have to fix the core, because if you fix the enterprise, then you can actually address access, what you teach, how you teach, and where you teach. But if you just try to address a symptom, right, then it won't work systematically. And so as a small insight into this, unfortunately I could go on about this for hours, which I won't. I'll
Keep
spare
it
you.
small. Keep
Yeah,
your
I'll
insights
keep it
small. Yeah.
But it's very easy to say we want to teach 21st century skills. It's a buzzword. Everybody says it. The problem is that in order to teach generalizable skills, right, you actually cannot teach them within an academic department.
Yeah.
This is actually a problem, right? If you teach a form of critical thinking, there's no such thing as general critical thinking, but an aspect of critical thinking, let's say in biology, students will not only not be able to translate that form of critical thinking into physics, chemistry, let alone literature. They actually won't even be able to contextualize it in a different part of biology that they didn't use the example. That's the notion that psychologists call far transfer, right? And this is the general failure of education, which is if you want to provide systemic, recontextualizable, sorry for the long words, education, right? You have to actually teach the concept, contextualize and recontextualize that same context across fields and across departments over a spaced, time-based process, which is actually why structured
Which
university
brings
education
us
is so important.
back to collaboration. So departments, you touch a very sensitive point. So I'm an university professor, both Harvard, and Getúlio Vargas Foundation, which is a Brazilian one. And the problem with the departments is that there is a system of power and disputes on budgets, and that defines the borders very strictly. So we need to learn to work together and make sure that the student doesn't get fragments of knowledge. We need to connect the fragments.
It's not only, sorry, just very briefly, it's not only a power matter, but from the time they are in the schools, the way the curriculums are designed, they are fragmented. So children don't connect when they are 6 or 7. If you're in a maths class, you cannot make a comment about their spelling because that's a Spanish or English class. So they grow with this sort of brain in compartments. So it's very difficult to create this globalized or interdisciplinary or collaborative way of approaching culture or knowledge when you are bringing them up in a system that is always
And you're
splitting.
training the teachers the same
Exactly,
way.
yeah. Especially secondary education, that's a big issue.
I just want to take a short break here to just acknowledge that there is in fact a soccer game going on in this building as we speak. So if you're not hallucinating, I guess what I want to ask is for us to consider. So these ideas of power and collaboration and recontextualization. I mean, how would solving those problems solve Astrid's daughter's problem, which is that college. I mean, I think if I'm getting this right, college just didn't resonate with her. I mean, she was only there for a semester. Talk about what happened to her there and how some of these things we're talking about you think could have made a difference.
Can I posit
go
a
ahead.
guess? Let me guess.
Okay, go
and
ahead.
then
You
Astrid
guess
tell me
first.
if I'm right. Okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my guess is that when your daughter went to school, she went to a bunch of classes and she says, I have no idea how this relates to anything useful in life. And when she actually left and she did things in the real world, she says, wow, I'm learning skills that I can not just use in what I'm doing now, but in what I'm doing elsewhere. Is that generally what she was feeling?
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Before you answer, how is beekeeping useful to her life?
So,
Correct. So,
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
because she's picked up
has plenty of honey.
skills. She's apprenticed to a beekeeper. She has learned to butcher sheep. She has learned to build a mud hut and chop down a tree. I mean, part of me just thinks, that's probably just her young brain trying to have these adventures. But I think there was also the other thing that I call kind of an early midlife crisis, the question of meaning. And that question of meaning, which is supposed to happen in your 40s, happened to her at 18. And that's preceded by a very, very stressful high school, because to get into the top universities, and it's only later I appreciated that, her thinking that her father and mother have all these degrees in the family was probably a big pressure. I mean, we never pressured her because she did everything right on her own. And so I think it's preceded by that experience. And by the way, that's not unique because everybody in Asia, everybody wants to get into the same schools. So that pressure, and then at 18, when my interpretation is looking at her life and saying, where is this headed? And I think millennials seem to be, this is an issue, meaning. Where is this headed, and what am I buying into? So it's that question. And I think at the end of the day, where, you know, if she was raised in cities, she wanted to touch the earth. So it's also a variation of the experience, and then defining how her education is going to be. I think she has a lot of the soft skills we talk about, you know, collaboration, et cetera, et cetera. But I really am thinking that for that group, partly because they are so empowered by information, so much information from the time they're very young, they are born on the cloud. They have all this information. They don't quite have all of the filters necessary, and then they don't trust authority. There is that element. Whatever we're bringing to them as authorities is not respected. So to me, it's a mix of all these different factors, asking the question and making an independent choice that I'm heading this way and I'm just going to explore for a while. Now, our generation, we think of it a little more linearly. At least I do. I used to think it's more linear. You go to elementary school, high school, and because I grew up in that hut, my own idea was, you die, by the way, if you don't go to university. It's nothing, but for her, it's very different. And I wonder how many young people today think like that.
I think partly it's because there are three concepts that we mix together. One is lifelong learning. And I think we all are conscious that for the future, we'll need to consider learning as something that is part of our being, and you cannot stop. Higher education, which is very plural, is going to be more and more diverse, and university. And we have to wonder, what's the role of the universities in the future? Are they the owners of the learning? Because for our generation, university were the owners of the big knowledge. But that's changed completely. So the question is, are they going to disappear, or they will have to reinvent themselves and play a different role in a society of knowledge, where universities, I think they will still have not only the research or the technology, but they will have a role as well as authority in the knowledge of the way we want to design the future, not just technologically, but ethically, the way we want our world to develop. And that role has to have a moral authority that politicians, governments, nations are not going to have on themselves.
I'm still worried that we are addressing the issues that mostly Europe and US is posing, and the upper middle class.
Right.
So let me bring again a word of caution. In my country, just to give you some contextualized information, of the adult population, only 18% have gone to university. And we made a choice in the 60s to invest initially in developing an enlightened elite through university, and not investing in universalizing access to basic or to primary. So we were one of the last countries in the continent to universalize access, and we only did that in 1997. So you can imagine what happened. What happened is that the so-called enlightened elite didn't become enlightened at all, because the opportunities were reserved to them, not to the others. So that one of the many forms in which we created inequality in the country. So we need to reinvent universities, but don't forget that they have a role, and that we still need urgently to expand access. And more than that, with the high costs of the research universities that we do have in most of the world, we cannot expand to the extent that we really need. So we need, at the same time as we reinvent universities, we need to change the way they operate, to prepare to the future of work that is coming now. We are talking about a world where, as we mentioned in other panels, artificial intelligence, powered automation and robotization and many jobs, they project that in 2030, 2 billion job posts will disappear. And how would we prepare a future generation for that? So we need to expand and change the nature
Right.
of university.
So perhaps let me build on both of these comments, and let me add a different word of caution, because sometimes we conflate the concept of universities with educating the upper middle class or upper class. And this is a mistake. However, we shouldn't conflate the role of the university in creating the upper middle class of the future. University education is not about universal education. It's not supposed to be, it can't be, right? There needs to be a role for vocational education. There needs to be a role for, occupational education, et cetera, apprenticeships, et cetera. And so when we talk about higher education, I think the criticality is that those who have the capacity to benefit from it should have universal access to it. But the role of the university, therefore, needs to be that kind of engine to prepare people who are
But
effectively
let's agree
athletes of the mind.
That
right?
19% of the people
No,
is
no,
too
of course
low.
not. Of course,
So
of
it's-
course. So you have to expand access, but you have to make sure that you don't lose the point of the university and not make it vocational. Because if the university becomes vocational, the university will die.
So I think we should talk. This may be a good point to talk about access because we're talking about emerging markets. So it is true if you preserve that role for the university, both in specialized learning, credentialing or curating knowledge, or looking at the hierarchy of knowledge in the age of fake news, etc. We need now to think about the pipeline because access is a very big problem in the emerging markets. It's a huge problem. So one of the markets that I look after is Indonesia, and the former Minister of Education, told me that every year, 3 million Indonesian students drop out of high school. And he called it a ticking time bomb because in 10 years, you have 30 million young people who not only do not have access to university, to that special universe, and at the same time are missing skills. And so if you think about structural reform, so yes, we keep the PhDs in Shakespearean literature, and then there is a movement now on technical and vocational education because the skilling, the way that the Germans have done it, where you have skills and you go out and you're employed. Because the question is, how does everyone live a full and dignified life at a time when everything, the fourth industrial revolution is up, overturning everything that we are familiar with. There is huge inequality. I mean, we think about the rise of Asia, and that's been a big refrain because Asia generated 54% of world GDP growth in 2000 to 2010, but the inequality in all of these markets is tremendous, and that's going to lead to violent conflict. You have gender inequality. There are all these other things we have to solve. And I think we keep university in that whole structure because it does play a role and try to deal with the other things that are all about inequality.
But one of your points is very important because the fact that kids don't go to university, not everybody should go to university, but high schools should prepare for other things than just being propedeutic or being preparatory for university. In my country, the curriculum is just preparatory for universities, and we lack a route to technical and vocational or other options in high schools.
If I could add, on the jobs front. So for example, Microsoft has a program partnered with the City of New York where you have to have no college degree to apply, and it will train you in 4 months. It's fully paid to become a cloud server administrator. So think about this, a job that's in high demand and is gonna be in higher demand, and as long as you have a basic math and English aptitude, now that's not university. It's very focused, it's very employment related, and there are many takers. So I think we need to think about things like this that are all part of higher education defined in a larger way.
I mean, I guess I worry about something like that would be, a 4-month training to become a cloud server administrator, and then they tweak the cloud, and you can't administrate it anymore because it's a new kind of cloud.
The robot will start administrating it.
I don't know. I mean, can you address that? I mean, that's got to be a question you get a lot which is maybe that that skill I got in 4 months will be obsolete in 9 months.
So I don't quite buy the argument that that's going to be obsolete immediately. Technology changes, but I would assume that the skills you pick up, some of these things will have some lasting power. And I don't think anybody has a clear handle on exactly, what's going to disappear. Some people say, well, all the accountants, all the lawyers. I don't think that we have a clear handle on that. What we do know and what we can look at right now with data is look at the gap between what employers are looking for. Because you take LinkedIn and they have this data. They can actually see all of the skills that employers are looking for and all of the skills that are in the CVs of people. And they can validate these gaps.
90% of which are made up.
No, well, maybe it is. But governments are interested in this because they want to validate their
Right.
assumptions about gaps and
Right.
how to prepare people better for what's going to be needed.
So,
Probably is going to lead to a change on the postgraduate offers. The way the traditional universities are structured is the degree and the postgraduate offer. So I think this is going to lead to the basic grades will have to be more holistic in most of the subjects, so they prepare the minds on the type of scientific methods or historical methods analysis. I'm a theologian, so probably we have to think about Holy Spirit and all this in a different way. But then eventually what will come to a big flexibility in the postgraduate offers that is not seen as a 2 years period, but a long life observatory of how every discipline is changing and what is needed in terms of lifelong learning and helping. Because at the end of the day, university offers legitimacy. There is a social trust that anything that a university backs is serious, is rigorous, is worth it.
So I think that
role
is eroding.
Well,
That trust is eroding, especially in the United States.
well, maybe in the United States, but not in other countries. So as Claudia was saying, I mean, there's lots of realities around the world, but the word university still it means seriousness. And I think they have to commit themselves to keep that seriousness and rigor in observing the way every world is
Carmen,
developing.
I like your idea of ensuring that in university, and Farid Zakaria wrote a book about that. So ensure that we prepare the first years on mindset, changing mindsets, connecting to the knowledge that exists in the world, and work on teaching to think. And then we come to your point on certifying skills. Perhaps this model of Ivy Leagues kind of schools either will disappear or will be left there to survive. But we will have something that will provide certification of skills very quickly, perhaps not on those universities. You need an engineer who is very good at arts, for example, or like Leonardo da Vinci, who was excellent in natural science and at arts at the same time. So who knows, certification of skills might be an interesting field, and perhaps it's not university that is going to provide it.
I want to give folks a chance to join the dinner party without food. So here's what I like to do. We actually have a little bit more time than your typical Q&A period. So what I like to do is maybe take a few questions. Go ahead.
Great. Hi, thank you. My name is Allison, and I coordinate international education at College of North Atlantic, Qatar. I'm originally from Canada. I'm also a millennial, so I really find this conversation quite interesting because for me, I do have a good job and I live abroad, but I really do also understand a lot of the points that you're talking about, and I have friends back in Canada who are struggling, and I just want to make one point before I ask my question. Number one, I want to say on behalf of millennials all around the world, like I really don't think that we're horrible people, and there's generally this divide amongst different generations where
Right.
I guess a lot of young people now, people are saying that they're extending their adolescence and they're 18 years old, but really they're not out on their own. And I just want to make a point, especially in Canada these days, that people are 18 and 20 and 25 and almost 30 living with their parents because they don't have a choice, right? Economically, they don't have jobs and they don't have the ability to live on their own. So I think that just
Okay.
as a point,
Point taken.
I just want to make that point.
Okay. And now your question.
Sorry, as for my question, I just think that, in regards to Astrid's daughter, I think it's really amazing that she's having this experience. My question is, do you think that higher education institutions should really start recognizing this? Because if you look at, say, like people who want to complete a graduate degree, I mean, it's generally, okay, you need to have a certain GPA. Colleges and universities are not yet recognizing this world experience and life experience. And I think personally that we need to move in this direction. So do you think that educational institutions, especially higher education, could maybe start recognizing this experience? I know
So
it's
life
hard to
experience.
yeah, it's
Life
hard
experience
to
as a
quantify
credential,
it,
you
but
mean, or?
just as an ability to of access. So to allow people
Okay.
into graduate programs. Perhaps they don't have the highest GPA,
Gotcha,
but they
okay.
have all of this life experience. Do you think
Okay.
that we should recognize this?
Question to the panel.
Maybe I'll just address it quickly. No, absolutely
okay.
not. So
So so
I
they
think
should not-
university can give a little bit of credit. Like, we offer practica, which is take what you've learned, apply it in a real world situation. You can get one course. There are co-op programs in Waterloo and Northeastern are very successful. So as a small part of what a university does, that's fine. However, the role of a university is to exercise and shape the mind structurally, right? It is not to go and say, oh, look at what you've done outside of our auspices, and then we will pay us money, and we will then anoint thee as expert in X, Y, or Z, which we weren't actually in the job of training. The rest of the world should take advantage of this. An employer should say, wow, you learn to be a beekeeper, like you're resilient, you're interesting, you're broad. They should give that credit, but it is not the same as higher education.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I'm not saying that beekeeping needs to be, okay, you...
Careful what you say about
Please
bees.
don't malign
Astrid's
beekeeping.
daughter is a master beekeeper here.
I just think that, we all know that somebody said somewhere in the conference that actually the education that people are receiving today is basically training you to become, a PhD candidate or whatever. It's not appealing to the average student. What I'm saying is, yes, okay, people are going on these gap years and they're actually carrying out a lot of experiential learning. So maybe, I think personally, there could be a place for, okay, what life experience do you have? A student could have a 4.0 GPA and have buried themselves in books and have no real life world experience.
So I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
So
I'm just thinking in Europe, the Erasmus project, where the students spend one term or 6 months or even 1 year in another university, could be more flexible. I wonder sometimes what will happen if Erasmus, instead of doing it in UK or in Brussels, they did it in Brazil or in Senegal. How would the world be if university students actually spend some time doing other types of experiences and that had a recognition? Not a certificate, just the paperwork, but in the same way that for creating the identity of Europe, we were able to sacrifice resources and time, why couldn't we do the same to create a better world?
It strikes me that, I want to get another question in a second, but it strikes me that just apropos this whole life versus college question, one of the things that you guys do at Minerva is this travel, this idea of travel. And maybe travel is not the right word for it. It's
residency.
Residency in
Yeah.
different countries. Could you
Right.
just
So-
describe that real
Yeah,
quickly
so our
and why it's important?
students are resident in 7 different countries before they graduate.
So break it
So
down. How does it work?
They spend their first year in San Francisco, and then in the next 6 semesters across 3 years, they'll live in Seoul, Hyderabad, Berlin, Buenos Aires, London, and Taipei before coming back to San Francisco to graduate. In each one of those cities, they have co-curricular experiences that are designed to integrate them into the city and apply what they've learned in their formal education to the real world. So we are huge believers in experiential learning, but we're believers in the university's role in incorporating it, less so in the certification of non-observed or random experiential learning.
And why the 7 different places? Why not just experiential learning in, there's lots of experiences to be had in San Francisco.
Yes, there are. But so part of teaching FAR transfer and cross-contextualization is not only cross-contextualization of concepts and habits across different disciplines, but across different cultural, religious, and economic contexts.
Okay.
And so that's really the best way to do that is by going to different cities, different countries.
Gotcha. We had another question over here.
Hi, I'm in.
Remember, short. Short is better.
Sure. I'm in Shirado. I work with Joy News and Joy FM in Ghana.
Okay.
And the concept of trust, as I think put forward by Carmen, that universities bring a certain level of trust, it's kind of played out back home where all our polytechnics recently have just been upgraded to university status. And this is largely because there's a certain economics of higher education that a lot of the time we're not paying attention to, because degree holders tend to get better pay when they go out into the world to look for work than those who would graduate with hands-on skills with a HND from the polytechnics. How do we find a balance so that you don't suddenly have people going down the path of learning what we would say book knowledge and lack the technical skills that are required? Should we consider the skill certification as I think Claudia proposed?
Okay. Before you give up the mic, let me ask you a question. How does that feed into trust? I thought you were going to talk about maybe one kind of program being sort of played off as another one, but I misunderstood, I guess.
The element of trust is that people who come out of universities tend to have a certain preferential treatment when they go into the job market,
Okay.
as compared to those who would have graduated with an H&D from a polytechnic. And that's where
Can
the
I-
trusting.
So there's where the trust is. Okay.
Okay, can I try to answer? I think you can have a skills development program or technical education at high school level or even in a more loose way. But the best students in the polytechnics institutes are the ones who previously were part of technical education. So from what research says, it's you can take both paths. It's not an either or you take a technical course or you go to a higher education institute devoted to polytechnic. And second, yes, you're perfectly right. In developing countries, especially in Africa, the percentage of income raise that you have when you get to university, could be up to 17 or 15%. So yes, people also go to universities or tertiary education because they know that they will receive more money.
I mean, I think that is universal because universities are still very powerful in the credentialing business. So I know that when I interview 15 people for a job that I've advertised, I'm going to look at where they graduated because it is a shortcut measure for me. It makes my life simpler. Shortcut measure, I have an idea about, their aptitude, the quality of instruction they've had. So I think in the credentialing business, it's still very important. The other thing that I would say for the universities, which I think is really important, is that we mentioned earlier the ability to think. Discourse is developed in that kind of setting, and that will be a more and more important skill. You can always pick up technical skills later, I think, if you have aptitude, but that part of the university education is really important.
So let me
I
channel
think
just.
sorry, I'll answer about the trust. I think there are two options. If you brought the idea of a university and give that status to vocational and technical colleges to push them up, you open to students that are not probably very academical, let's say. If you decide to close the door and make university just for elites, which are very high academical skills, then you want a different type of society. So if I had to choose in a developing country, even in my country, I would be for opening doors and making a diverse offer of university degrees and even of specialization of universities. In Salamanca is probably famous for philosophy, which other ones are for medicine or for whatever. We don't have to have homogeneous universities, but I wouldn't close to elites and leave the technical and vocational in a
Definitely
second
so.
rate.
And I'll tell you that the trust is changing, and it's going to get to Africa. It's going to get everywhere. But I see it in Silicon Valley. I mean, 5 years ago, I was invited to a CEO roundtable in Silicon Valley, and every CEO got to ask a question of everybody else. And there were 12 of us. And one CEO says, I have to give a talk at a conference, and I just want to poll the room what your perspective is. So you get a resume, and the resume has an MBA from Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton, one of those three. In your mind, is that a neutral, negative, or automatic do not hire? Those were the three choices. There wasn't a slightly positive, there wasn't a great let me interview, neutral, negative, automatic do not hire. Of the 12 people in the room, I was one of 2 that said neutral. 3 said negative, everybody else said automatic do not hire. Right? And so our perceptions of trust in these institutions, as countries and societies become more mature and they realize that these institutions are not only not delivering value, they're actually teaching you the wrong things, that level of trust dramatically erodes, and it erodes fast. Right?
Actually, I don't need a microphone.
Yes, you do.
I do. This
Absolutely.
is Muhammad Iraqi. I'm working in talent development in Qatar Airways. I'm not sure why we do it black and white. Why not looking up to the orange? Creating a mini university within a company. So you go ahead and you research and you master what you need to learn and create a mini university within the company to research and master. So many university within the company, many company within the university.
Okay.
So, you know, we know there's Apple University, for example. Unilever has a gigantic training center in Singapore that's like their own university. So there is a role for that, but that's quite purpose-oriented, fit for purpose to work in that company. Maybe Qatar Airways has the same thing. But university has a different purpose. You know, what you want university is to prepare. It's a foundational thing, as I see it. University is foundational. I would expect someone coming out of a good university to know X, Y, Z, but they're more soft skills, I think, rather than, you know, the narrow skills needed to succeed in Microsoft, or to how to know the Apple culture and preserve it, or how to work better at an airline. So I think let's not again conflate, you know, the training.
Did you?
I just want to add very quickly. When we talk about the role of universities, we think about the students, but probably in the change of the role of university socially, we have to change. We have to think about the role of the professors, the actual staff that are at university and constitute the core of that research, or that creating the knowledge. Because you can buy a degree by internet now. You can make yourself graduate if you have a bit of money and you move in the digital network. So it's not a matter of certifications or what the students will get from the universities, but what is going to happen as institutions in terms of an ethical role as well.
That's a good point. I guess I wanted to come back to you real quickly and just ask you if disaster.
Yep. Great point
address your
with
point.
Apple or Qatar Airways. I'm talking in general. A fantastic university. You do the study, then you go ahead and search how you could apply it there. I'm talking about the application immediately. So for example, in your university, create a company, you're teaching marketing, let them to do marketing for your university. If they are successful.
We do.
Oh, that's
We employ, at some point, 80% of our students.
I'm not talking about, I'm talking the students while they're doing a project.
Right.
To go ahead with the application
Correct.
immediately
So
in your university.
So just very briefly, the entire curriculum at Minerva is 100% about applications. You do all of your knowledge acquisition outside of class time, and class time is all about applications, not just in our context, but in all sorts of different contexts. And on top of that, our students add so much value that we find them employment both within their university, but very quickly outside of their university for 80% of our students over during the school year, 90% over the summer.
Okay. Let's go to another question here.
Hi, question for Ben. I'm wondering how knowledgeable are your students about why they're learning the way that they're learning? Because I feel like we're talking a lot about what's broken with universities and how universities are not actually achieving advancement with students, and we're all solving these problems in different ways. But perhaps you get a student like Astrid, which is like, no, this is broken, I'm gonna do my own thing. But what responsibility do we have to actually get students to wake up to see that something's wrong for them to make the right decision? So I guess for you, it's like, is it just that their parents want them to learn in this way? Do they actually know that it's a different job market and they need different skills? Like what responsibility do we have to actually keep students from, because to be honest, like, I feel very aligned with what you're saying, but this is after I went to school and after I graduated. So how do you preempt some of that stuff and kind of trickle it down to the students rather than us being here at a high level talking about how to fix this?
Yeah. Good question.
No, it's an excellent question, and in general, parents are the problem. So it's not Astrid's daughter that's the problem. My guess is that if 4 years ago Astrid's daughter was applying to Minerva instead of Columbia, and she got into Minerva and Columbia, and I would go and say to Astrid, "Hey, oh my God, you're so lucky. Yeah, your daughter got into Columbia. It's really a terrible school, but she got into Minerva, and she could learn all these things." Astrid's daughter would say, "Yes, this is what I want to do. This is going to help me in the future, etc." And Astrid would basically say, "I'm going to throw you out of this family if you make this decision." So no, I'm putting words in your mouth, of course. But in general, our students come to Minerva despite their parents, not because of them. We have exceptions. Some parents are enlightened and do see difference. But this is actually one of the big problems in the sense that, especially for individuals who have not gone to these institutions themselves, there is a mystique that's associated, then perpetuated by these institutions that make them sound much, much better than they are. And so if you as a parent have never experienced those institutions, much harder to say, yeah, I didn't learn that much when I was there either, and it's okay, you can do this.
I think we can all agree that parents are the problem. Can we just...
They agree. I mean, that's like unanimous.
They agree. If you didn't hear what they said parents are the problem. So, you got a question here? Yeah. Go ahead.
I do respect that, technology is revolutionizing the education. There are a number of platforms available, Minerva, Coursera and everything. But I think how much it is important to preserve the local culture, because it is not only globalization, it is localization as well, because the field work cannot be done online. So how much emphasis should be put in the policy making to, preserve this local universities, and as well as value addition through such platforms like Coursera, Minerva, and etc.
Can I kind of reinterpret your question? Yeah. I mean, in a way, technology, our natural tendency is to say, we can do things at great distances, or we can do things, remotely. And is there a way in which technology can make a virtue of locality?
Yeah. Well, sorry, let me just address that because it's very personal to what we do. First, Minerva and Coursera are like talking about apples and freight trains. So nothing to do with one another. Want to be very clear about that. We are a university system. Coursera is a technology for courses. There is a very, very big difference between, again, the training of the mind and the application of that training to the real world. One is truly location and cultural independent. Another is completely location and cultural dependent, right? And it's very important we don't confuse those two things, right? And so we are a residential university that is deeply rooted in locations where we are. We have a vibrant international community that brings its culture into applications every single day. But the material that we use is actually, in order to be taught at Minerva, right, from a subject matter perspective, The material has to basically be universally applicable. We do not offer anything that is not universal.
So for people who may not know, so your students, let's say what's first semester, second year, what city is that?
Seoul.
Seoul. So all of your first semester freshmen reside in Seoul.
Sophomores.
Or sorry, sophomores. By the way, there's a movement in the higher ed community to do away with the word freshman. Do you know about this?
Yes.
Because
First
it's sexist.
years.
Yeah, they call them first years now. So sophomores, they're all in Seoul. Where is the faculty?
All over the world.
And that's true for obviously for all 4 years. Can you talk about the advantage that confers?
Yeah, huge advantages. So number one, it means that the cost of building the university is fractional. So we bring down the cost of elite education. So Minerva, which is 100% small class, less than 20 students, we bring down the cost of elite education by 2/3, despite the fact that it's more effective. And when we use our technology to have larger seminars, we can bring down the cost of education by 90% compared to large institutions, or 98% compared to small ones.
Gotcha. Okay, let's do this. We have about 8 or 9 minutes. Please help me. I want to do a lightning round. So
One sentence question?
like one sentence, quick questions, so we can do as many as possible. Okay. And if you can't, that's fine. Just pass the mic. So let's give it a shot.
No.
Go.
I take my right, okay, to say what's in my mind, okay. So I'll make a request first, okay, that is for the WISE organizers. If it's possible to increase more venues about higher education within WISE conference is extremely important. Because we are looking, my name is Khalid Al-Hassan, I'm Sudanese American, and I work here as the Ministry of Education and Higher Education in Qatar. We are looking for some presentation on higher education, okay? And we came to this panel with high expectations. So I'm afraid to say really that is many of my expectations about the presentation was not met, okay? So I think with the catchy that rethinking higher education is very interesting topic, okay? But many of the questions that we have, or at least in my mind, has not been answered. Why do we rethink higher education, okay? And
I mean, why should we, or
why and is it also safe to label higher education across the globe with different modes and,
I think that's
types, and then to start to criticize it like Ben, what Ben did, and many other questions actually we have in our mind. I enjoyed very much, by the way, okay, the panel, the informal dinner format of the panel. But again, there are many questions that had not been
I take your point seriously, and I think maybe next time we'll drill down maybe to a more specific, I don't know, kind of a regional discussion of rethinking. Let's go on to the next one. Sure.
Yeah, Abu Bakr, we manage an infrastructure fund for the Muslim world. So the question in the Islamic world is that this avalanche of the job going out is happening. How do you retool your population? So I contradict a couple of things, and I agree some of the things that the panel said. I think the education for employment is foremost in the government's mind. And the second is, how do you pay for that? The third thing is that education must be global. In the post-capitalist society, like capital, labor needs to move, and borderless society, wherever people can have countries, but the mind are already moving. All the Indians are running American companies, and all the Arab capital are investing into all over the world. So having education localized is maybe to create future leaders for the countries or local societies, but for employment, it has to be global. There's no other alternative.
Does somebody want to
Yes.
respond to that?
You want to go through the rest of the questions?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. So my panel is, by executive order, decided we're going to take a couple of questions, and then they will
Hello.
decides which ones they want to answer.
Hello.
Let's go over here.
Hi.
Oh, okay, go ahead, and then we'll go over here.
Sorry.
Go ahead. So let's get 3 questions, and then we'll start answering them. Please.
My name is Rashida Outlaw, and I'm a high school teacher. One of the themes that I'm getting out, listening to the story of Astrid and listening to the comment here about rethinking higher education and Astrid's daughter's story, and I heard that she came from a very tough high school, very rigorous. So is it that rather than, okay, we can rethink higher ed, maybe we should also rethink secondary education?
Good question.
What is the purpose of the high school? Like, as a high school teacher, I work in Kuwait. It's very geared towards a grade point average. Getting into really good universities, we want to be doctors and engineers and all of these things, but do we need to fundamentally rethink the purpose of high school and what it is that we have students for 4 years, so what all do we need to do with them other than just getting them ready for college?
I hope the wise people are listening. We proposed about 4 different panels in the past 3 minutes. So that's one question, rethinking secondary education. Let's go over here. You have the mic. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Marwa Husni. I'm from Egypt, and I'm a media producer and documentary filmmaker.
Great.
So thank you so much for this great discussion, and I'd like to thank Ms. Claudia so much for pointing out a very important point, which is I would call it a jobless future, because according to so many studies, and a recent one was done by Oxford that says around 50% of the jobs of today's world will disappear in the coming 25 years. So my question is, why we are not educating the children, the young students, that we are facing a different future? Why we are still educating them with the same mentality as...
So the phrase I think that the Oxford folks use is technological unemployment?
Yes.
Right? So great question. Okay, so that's question 2. Let's go to one more question. This gentleman to your left.
Hi, my name is Chimao Xie. So I'm a research professor at SUNY Korea and also a CEO and co-founder of a new educational web platform called knowledgeworthy.org. My question has to do with basically the disconnect between what's taught in the classroom and real-world knowledge. My question is academic research culture broken? And so I guess, Ben, your conclusion was to disintegrate research from teaching. Is it worthwhile to try and fix research culture in the university environment?
Okay, so here's the deal, and I take the blame for this. We have a minute and a half to answer those 3 questions. So I guess what I would say, if it's okay with you, panel, stick around for a couple minutes, because there may be people who really maybe didn't hear the answer to their question and want to get in a few minutes with you. So we've got rethinking secondary education, technological unemployment, and research and the higher ed. Who wants to?
I'll give you the one sentence answer to all of those together.
Perfect.
If you want to do things well, go down to first principles, understand why you're doing them, and rebuild systems from the ground up, which means you have to do everything that you guys said in your various domains.
Okay.
Half a minute. One day has 24 hours. We work for 8 hours, we sleep 8 hours, and we have 8 hours left. Education has to cope with 24 hours. We need to work together from kindergarten to postgraduate and third age or elderly education. Lifelong learning is an issue, and unless we create networks and we collaborate, and we are flexible and we're generous and ethically committed, we won't get it.
Okay, my one phrase answer
11
to
seconds.
two questions. First, on the why are we not preparing kids for that? Because teachers were not prepared for that in most countries. So we need to educate the whole child and educate for an uncertain future. Second question on the high school reinvention, I definitely agree with you. High school, with this fragmentation of different 13, 15 different subject areas, it won't work this way. We need to discover ways to build more synergies among the disciplines and make kids think about real world problems that they need to address.
I'm going to give Mama Astrid the last word here because she was so generous to share her story with us.
And I swear I'm not to blame, really.
No. Listen.
It's your daughter's fault.
It's parents' fault except for you and me.
So I'm not really going to answer any of those specific questions. What I want to say is I don't see the future as so bleak, you know. Uncertainty and change are the normal conditions. And I think what is exciting, the topic after all is higher education in a connected age. What we are seeing today is magical technology that can increase access to education, that can increase the speed of education, that can, you know, blow away people's fixed mindset. So we do have that. And I think I am a fan of universities. I think they are great places. They are keepers of culture. And they have been there a very long time. However, we know they're also conservative institutions. So what I would like to see is a little more imagination, and from the universities, that pipeline, the access in elementary school and high school, so that, I mean, what do we all share as a goal is the chance to live a full and dignified life. And so I think the university, I'm convinced, continues to have a place, and they will change because there's enough talent in all these universities that we know. So I'm a positive person about all of this.
Thank you. Thank you to my panel. You've been wonderful. And thank you to the audience for your great questions.